This was how normal people love each other. Just sit with that for a second. It's a genuinely chilling quote from a survivor of adult sexual grooming, and it perfectly captures a terrifying reality. You see, abuse is often meticulously disguised as care. Perpetrators don't just physically trap victims, they literally alter their reality. They normalize the unacceptable to keep them imprisoned.
Welcome to today's Explainer. Today we're taking a hammer to that deeply judgmental, all too common question, why didn't they just leave? We're going to map out the incredibly complex maze of coercive control, and you'll see exactly how these invisible walls are constructed around victims, piece by piece.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll establish the invisible walls, then break down the psychological and physical traps. After that, we'll look at societal blind spots, zoom out to systemic and legal entrapment, and wrap up with counteracting the gaslighting. Let's dive in.
Starting with Section 1, the invisible walls. To get this, we really need to understand adult sexual grooming, or ASG. Basically, this is a process that intentionally blurs the lines of consent by exploiting unequal power dynamics. This usually happens in trusted relationships, right? Think of a mentor, a boss, maybe a religious leader. The abuser leverages their authority to slowly erode boundaries, which makes the victim highly susceptible to exploitation long before any overt abuse even happens.
And coercive control? Well, that is literally the mortar holding these invisible walls together. It's really important to get that it isn't just a single isolated incident of violence. Instead, it's a strategic, ongoing pattern. The abuser infiltrates every part of the victim's life, cuts them off from their support networks, and completely dominates them through surveillance, threats, and fear, essentially stripping away their autonomy entirely.
Moving into Section 2, psychological and physical traps. This grooming process, it doesn't happen by accident. It unfolds through a series of highly calculated steps. It starts with the abuser targeting a vulnerability and gathering information. They might offer to help with financial or emotional needs, endearing themselves so deeply that friends and family naturally back away. This creates a state of complete emotional dependency and isolation, which paves the way for sexual contact and ultimately total coercive control. Now, you've probably heard the term gaslighting thrown around, but it is absolutely crucial here. Abusers rely heavily on this tactic to maintain their grip. They deliberately present false information to make the victim doubt their own memory, their surroundings, or even their own feelings. By systematically undermining reality like this, the abuser forces the victim into a state of continual fear and helplessness. Suddenly, the very idea of reporting the abuse feels utterly impossible. And it's not just words either. Abusers use terrifying, covert tactics, like chemical control. We're talking about secretly spiking food or drinks with medication just to weaken the victim. Some will even deliberately hide or disrupt a victim's mental health medication to destabilize them further. And the worst part? They'll turn around and blame the victim for losing their pills. So, the abuse occurs. What happens next? Perpetrators use what we call maintenance strategies. They enforce strict secrecy, don't tell anyone. They exploit deep-seated shame and guilt to actually persuade the victim that the abusive behavior is somehow acceptable. This ensures the victim forms an abuse identity. They internalize the stigma and stay entirely silent, trying to protect themselves from the public humiliation of what was done to them.
All right, Section 3, societal blind spots.
Intimate partner sexual violence is frequently minimized, and shocking enough, even by the people meant to help. As one survivor pointed out, service providers often wrongly presume that just because you're in a relationship, consent is an automatic given. This societal assumption completely invalidates the victim's distress. It essentially tells them their experience wasn't actually violence, which forcefully shuts down any willingness to report it. Another massive blind spot we have is our reliance on rigid gender narratives. The stereotyped narrative assumes coercive control only impacts female victims. But the documented reality? Male victims face severe coercion too, including threats of false allegations and having their children weaponized against them. Yet, because of these stereotypes, they're systemically ignored or minimized by support agencies, leaving them incredibly vulnerable to ongoing abuse. But it's not just professionals missing the signs. It's us. Friends, family, and our own cultural norms can inadvertently build these barriers. Highly abusive behaviors, like a partner demanding constant digital contact or bombarding a victim with texts, are frequently brushed off as harmless or even romantic. When the victim's own support network normalizes the coercion, it isolates the victim even more and completely fails to prevent future harm. Which brings us to Section 4, systemic and legal entrapment.
We have to talk about how, for Indigenous communities, women of color, and other marginalized groups, reporting abuse isn't just difficult, it's physically dangerous. Because of structural inequities, these victims face multiple systems of harm. Stepping forward to report abuse can invite racist institutional responses, state violence, or unwanted child protection interventions. So the system itself basically mimics the exact violence they're trying to escape.
Let's say a survivor does manage to physically leave. Well, abusers will often just weaponize the family or civil courts. This is a very real, documented phenomenon known as legal abuse. Abusers will file frivolous motions to drag cases out for years, use custody blackmail to maintain control, and force the victim into agonizing face-to-face confrontations. It legally binds the victim to their abuser while bankrupting them in the process. Improving this kind of psychological violence in a court of law, it's a monumental barrier. Coercive control is highly manipulative, and it often leaves zero physical bruises or tangible evidence. Because our legal system historically prioritizes physical injury, victims experiencing sheer psychological terror frequently find themselves with absolutely no legal recourse. Finally, Section 5, counteracting the gaslighting. So, how do we fix this? At a societal level, we've got to clear up these blurred lines around consent. We have to shift away from relying on nonverbal cues or implied consent and aggressively promote an affirmative consent model. That means explicit, verbal agreement that is 100% free of coercion, manipulation, or unequal power dynamics. For the allies and service providers tuning in, the mandate from survivors is crystal clear. You must actively counteract the gaslighting. That means you never dismiss a disclosure. You have to look at the broader picture of coercive control instead of just searching for physical scars. We need to help victims explicitly label manipulative behavior as violence and, this is key, actively shift the blame squarely back onto the perpetrator where it belongs. Think about the journey we just mapped out. From the psychological terror inflicted behind closed doors to massive societal blind spots, right up to the legal systems that actively punish a victim's attempt to flee, we are left with this absolutely crucial question. If our systems are structurally designed to doubt victims, how can we possibly expect them to speak up? It's time we stop asking why they didn't leave and start asking why we let them be trapped in the first place.